Hey there, I want to talk about the importance of both requests and boundaries. They're both super important, although they're different, and sometimes we get them confused. But I want to sort of break down what they are, why they're important, how to understand the difference between the two, and how we can get a little more effective and more productive as it relates to actually making requests and creating and then holding our boundaries. So, what's a request? I mean, I know it sounds really basic, but a request is basically when we authentically ask for something from someone else or a group of people, and they can say yes, they can say no, they can make a counteroffer. There's no real consequence, if you will, if they respond in any of those three ways. The reason why it's important to break this down is because a lot of times we make demands, but we couch them as requests. Would you mind? Could you please? Managers ask team members to do things as a request, but it's not really a request. It's like a demand. Our mother-in-law invites us over for the holidays, and it's not really a request. It's a demand. We just say it more politely because we don't like to say, you have to do this now. And what I've often said for years to managers and leaders especially is that it's actually okay to make demands of people as long as you do it honestly, with some awareness, with some mindfulness and kindness, right? Like, I need this done by the end of the day. It's not a request, it's a demand. It's like, this has to happen. Most people can understand that if you really explain it to them. There's going to be times I'm going to make requests where you can say yes or no or make a counteroffer, and there's going to be times when I make demands, and maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room in terms of when it needs to get done, but it's not really negotiable, if you will. And I think, we do this with our kids, we do this with our spouses, our friends. So again, most people are okay. The problem is that we inauthentically make requests. We get very upset when people say no, or we get kind of manipulative or passive aggressive about it. And again, a request is not a boundary. A request is simply a request. And if someone says no to our request, again, it's okay if we're disappointed or upset, but ultimately we got to take a look a little bit deeper. Was it really a request, or was I just trying to get the outcome that I wanted? Sometimes people will say, they're not respecting my boundaries, when really what they mean is they're not honoring my requests. Here's an example that I hear about a lot in the work that I do, right? It's like, I don't want to do meetings too early or too late. Since the pandemic and since everybody working remotely and hybridly and all the things that we've been dealing with for a number of years, the sort of, I show up at work at 9 and I go home at 5, which didn't really exist before the pandemic, really doesn't exist now. And so oftentimes things are getting scheduled, and maybe you work for a company where we have people all over the world and time zones are different. It can be challenging, right? So you might have a request or even a desire to, like, I don't really want to take meetings at 6 or 7 in the morning on Zoom or Teams. I don't really want to do meetings at 7, 8, 9, 10 at night. That doesn't really work for me. And it depends on the nature of your work or the nature of your company. You may not like it, but that might just sometimes be part of the deal. But making a request that we do this meeting at 3 o'clock versus 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night, let's say, someone might schedule the meeting anyway, and that might be frustrating to us. But again, the request was that we do the meeting at 3. They came back and put it on our calendar at 6 p.m. or something. And again, maybe there's a conversation to have about that. But yeah, they didn't accept your request. They didn't say yes to your request. They said no, and they did something different. Now, again, that can be frustrating, but a boundary would be, I don't do meetings after 5 o'clock. And if someone schedules a meeting at 6 or 7 p.m., I'm not showing up. And then you don't. Now, maybe you communicate it and just say, hey, I don't do meetings after 5, so I'm not going to be on that. But let me know how it goes, and I'll do my best to join next time if it's between these hours or whatever. A boundary is 100% up to us to enforce. Now, again, people may not necessarily honor the boundary or like the boundary or agree with the boundary. They might have feelings about it, but it's up to us. Another example would be, let's say I spoke to you in a tone that you didn't like, and you'd say, hey, Mike, I don't like when you talk to me that way. Could you lower your voice? And let's say I said, what are you talking about? I'm not, and I kept doing it, right? Now that might be a little rude or disrespectful, or I'm not really hearing you, but the request would be to lower the tone or to let me know, hey, I'm not appreciating how you're talking to me. The boundary would be, hey, I'm actually going to walk away from this conversation. And again, not to be melodramatic about it, but if we're talking in person, you physically move away. Or if we're on the telephone, you hang up, or we're on Zoom and you click and just say, hey, I'm not going to keep talking if that's how you're talking to me. Again, the boundary is up to us to enforce, and it's 100% up to us. Now, I'm not saying setting boundaries and then keeping boundaries is necessarily easy. It's not, but it's different than a request. The request is me asking you to do something. And it may be honoring some type of boundary, like I don't like to do that at a certain time, or that doesn't really work for me. But it may be that I'm asking you for help or support. Again, you can say yes, you can say no, you can maybe negotiate with me. Hey, I can't help you today, but I could help you tomorrow. That's a request, right? The boundary is I'm not doing that, or I'm unwilling to do that, or that doesn't work for me, or hey, I'm on vacation next week. I'm not going to be looking at emails or responding to texts or getting on calls. But if people keep texting us and emailing us and wanting us to join, we might be frustrated or annoyed, but whether they're honoring the boundary or not, the boundary's up to us. Now, another thing that's important about boundaries is that boundaries don't have to be fixed, like etched in stone, if you will. I know we think of boundaries as like firm and we want to hold them. That's true. But sometimes we can actually negotiate, if you will. I mean, again, using the example of like, hey, I don't take calls after 5. That's my boundary. Maybe something comes up and it's like, I really want to be on that call, but it's going to be an international thing and it's happening at 8 p.m. I'm going to make an exception to myself. I'm going to let people know, hey, I'm making an exception to my boundary and I'm going to get on this call, or whatever the case may be, right? We don't have to stick to it 100% of the time for it to be real. We can change our minds. We can negotiate. And that's not being weak or wimpy about it at all. That's actually just responding to what's happening in the moment. Sometimes we have to actually hold boundaries with ourselves. One of the ones I've been working on, I've talked about this a few times, but is with my phone. I notice that when I keep my phone in my office or downstairs in the kitchen, when I go upstairs to go to sleep, I sleep better. Now, sometimes I want to look at something on my phone, or I want to set my alarm, or, I'm just watching a video or something, but if I bring it to bed, I notice that like I don't sleep as well. And when I wake up in the morning and it's on my nightstand and I pick it up, it's hard for me to hold another boundary that I have with myself, which is to not look at my phone until I've meditated and journaled and done a few other things in the morning that kind of set my day up. But if my phone is right there with me, it takes a lot of willpower for me to not check my texts and check my email or go on social media. So again, it's like setting ourselves up, if you will, and having some healthy boundaries with ourselves. Now, again, that doesn't mean we can't make a mistake or we can't go back on something that we agreed to with ourselves. But just like an agreement we make with another human being, I trust other people who don't keep 100% of their agreements with me, as long as they're aware of it and they come to me and say, hey, Mike, I didn't keep that agreement. I apologize. Here's what I'm going to do, right? So it's a fluid process, if that makes sense. So requests means we're asking someone for something, or we're requesting something. They can say yes, they can say no, they can make a counteroffer. It's a clean, authentic, genuine request. A demand is a demand, and that's okay, but we want to be clear when we're actually making demands versus requests. And a boundary is something else. It's a request, yes, but it's more something that we stick to ourselves and we enforce 100%. It's up to us to hold the boundary, not necessarily up to other people to know what our boundaries are, honor and respect them all the time. Now, look, sometimes we make a very clear boundary with someone and they step over it. And if they're consistently doing that, we may need to disengage from that relationship or get someone else involved or do something, because now this is becoming not only disrespectful, but there might be situations in which it's actually unsafe. So those are kind of unique circumstances, but you know what I'm talking about. The more comfortable we get with requests, as well as boundaries, knowing the difference between those two, the difference between requests and demands as well. And the more able we are to both identify what our boundaries are and then hold those boundaries, the happier we'll be, the healthier we'll be, the more authentically connected and trustworthy and trust-inducing relationships we'll have. Now, this stuff is not easy, but the more we practice it and the more we engage the people around us in really talking about these things and looking at them authentically, the better it is for everyone. Thanks for watching. Always appreciate it. Make sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already so you don't miss any more videos or content that comes out. I'll talk to you again soon.